All right. All right, let's not lose any more time. I know I said on Monday that I would prepare for Leon today, but I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I don't want to. I don't want to make Leon content. I'm just gonna do that in my off time. I want to create content for the new format. Let me switch over to the recording mode because this will obviously be a YouTube video. I know I have done a tier list just 2 weeks ago, and I don't want to just like spam tier list content, but this was the most requested thing under my recent tier list. It's like, how would you update this with the new ban list? The friggin' most asked question is, what do you think of this deck now, that deck now? And they are very simply the best way of putting my thoughts into video form and visualize them, the easiest to like... It is just what it is. It's just what it is. So hello YouTube to a new format updated tier list post the recent Forbidden and Limited list update. Huge disclaimer in the beginning. This is my initial thought of these decks. I have also had the same amount of time than all of you since the Forbidden and Limited list update dropped. I have not tested all of these decks, but I'm just using this as like a way to express my thoughts on these decks for the upcoming format, because there's a couple of decks I'm really hyped to try, and then there's a couple of decks that I don't really think are going to be that great, despite, you know, tier limit being essentially like completely nuked. I think the categories are self-explanatory. You will notice that I have not made a category as like the best deck, because I don't think that is something that exists quite yet, or like if anything, we don't know what it is yet. We're just gonna go through a bunch of these decks and evaluate them in terms of what I think of them for the upcoming format. If I've missed a deck in this tier list that you want my opinion about, you can always ask me in the comments. I will try to respond to you as much as I can with where I would have put it on the list. So feel free to comment down below if I've missed any of the decks that you wanted to know about. Adventure, well, there's no deck behind this, but I still really wanted to include it. As of now, I think the Adventure engine gets better with the new format, with the new list, because the Ishizu cards were a huge menace to playing anything incorporating the Adventure engine, because like very often going second, you would deal with stuff like, oh damn, they milled my Draco back, they milled my my Griffin, and now my engine is significantly weaker, and like if they hit Fateful, it was like a complete disaster. So I think the Adventure engine, just a package, simply because it is untouched on the ban list and the Ishizu cards are moving out of the format a little bit, I think the Adventure engine has potential. I don't know exactly where you're gonna put it in, right? You could maybe argue, okay, the engine is maybe okay in Kashtira, but is that the best version of Kashtira? I don't know. It's been played in Branded before. Is that the best version of Branded? Probably not. You can play it in like Dragon Link, you can play it in whatever. Like, the engine is playable, the cards are still good, but I don't know exactly where they go yet. But I'm definitely thinking that the Adventure engine has some potential. And now the first deck for the top category, I believe, is Branded. I personally think that it was even reasonable to go as far as to like limiting Branded Fusion alongside the other changes, because Branded, I think, is one of the decks that like immediately comes to mind when you think of new format stuff. The deck has just received support, which is very good support as well. The Cartesia whole lore archetype stuff is very strong. They also have huge synergy with the Bystials. It's one of those decks that can still play the Bystials, which I think is an advantage for it. So the deck has huge potential. I don't think it's going to be like the non-plus ultra best deck by far, simply because it's shown in the past that like it is relatively counterable, right? Like if people start playing Ash Blossom again, if people start playing Dimensional Barrier in their side decks again, Despia is a deck that you can combat, but it is a strong deck for sure for the upcoming format, especially if for some reason Ash Blossom isn't as popular. If it's only one deck among like 3 or 4 others where people are not going to be able to main deck like the Barrier or something like that, like specific hate targeted at Branded, I think the deck is quite good. It's a very strong combo deck, and it doesn't really have any hits on the ban list as of now. So I do think that Branded will be a very strong competitor in the upcoming format. Dino is still in here because I just used all the things that I had in the last ban list and added a few more. Dino, I still think, is probably not good. The extra True Kings kind of help, I guess. Like, I don't even know if you play that still, like the True King version. But I guess we could throw it here. I did see that they announced new Dino support, so I guess I'm going to throw it into this category rather than the probably not good category, because Dinos do get decent support somewhere down the line, and that could probably make them relevant again. For now, I don't think this deck is that strong. I think it's probably Copium. Dogmatica with the support from Photon Hypernova, I've talked about it before. The new continuous spell card is very strong, but I still don't know if that's good enough. I feel like Dogmatica is probably not good. I don't want to spend too much time talking about Dogmatica, but I think it's like probably not strong enough. But I agree, as its own deck, I don't think this deck is going to be top tier or strong. Maybe you can splash it in other decks. We still have 3 Nadir Servant. That was a good splash in some decks in the past. Maybe, you know, maybe. But as its own deck, I don't think it's just enough that they got Dogmatica Tricks and the new Ritual Monster. I don't think that's enough. I think Draco Slayer right now in the TCG, the deck's all right. I do think this deck suffers a lot from the fact that Kashtira has a very easy time just locking your Pendulum zones, which I feel like hurts Pendulum as an archetype a lot. You could argue that any deck that goes second into Kashtira and doesn't have board breakers has a problem. It's probably like playable. It's not the end of the world, but I think this deck is like somewhere between probably not good, but like maybe like bottom of this category. You know what? For the Pendulum enjoyers, because I know there's a whole community of Pendulum enjoyers out there, I'm going to throw it here. It's going to end up the bottom of the maybe good category, but probably not. But I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I know that some of you enjoy Pendulum way too much to like not play it. Like some of you are going to try it, and some of you are probably going to be like topping regionals and whatnot. I don't think this deck's going to perform particularly well at a YCS, but it's okay. Dragon Link. I'll throw in maybe good. Like, I don't know if Dragon Link is that good. And I'm gonna say that about a lot of the things from last year's national format. Basically, a lot of people have said or have voiced their concerns that all that this ban list does is throw us back into this era before Power of the Elements, where like, oh, we have like a billion viable decks now, and you don't know what to prepare for anymore, and it's gonna be so toxic, and there's gonna be so many different decks that all come back now, right? We're gonna have like Despia, Sword Soul, Drytron, Dragon Link, Flunder, all that stuff, right? We have like the same format as nationals. I personally don't think that's the case. I think that the cards released in Power of the Elements, Darkwing Blast, Tactical Masters, all those cards released in those sets are still better than the stuff that existed last year, I think. Even though they have put a huge stop to power creep with this ban list, right? They've just basically eliminated the tier limit power creep and some of the sprite power creep. A lot of the cards that came out in Photon Hypernova, Darkwing Blast, and so on that are still legal are still a lot better than the old decks. I mean, you're gonna hear my opinion on like the new stuff, right? You're gonna hear my opinion on Sprite. I think Sprite is still very strong, just to like not too much spoilers, but I still think like Sprite is very good. Labyrinth is good, Kashtira is good, and like the old decks really don't keep up with that stuff, I think. But like Dragon Link is like the one deck that's probably okay to play, but definitely not top tier, I think. Drytron, I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, Drytron is back. I don't think it is. I personally think Drytron is copium. I'm not going to throw it in the bottom, very bottom category, but I personally think that the Bestials are still gonna be a thing. Magnamut at 3 is still a huge being interruption, body on the field, +1 searcher for any other dragon. I think Bestials, specifically Magnamut plus some of the other ones, are still going to see play, even though they are not countering the best deck in the format anymore, right? Like, Tearlament is definitely not the best deck of the format anymore, and like, the Bestials as counters to that are not going to see as much main deck play, but they will see, I think, at the very minimum, a lot of side deck play. Decks like Branded are even still going to main deck the Bestials, because they have inherent synergy with them. So, some decks are going to main deck Bestials, some decks are going to side them, but they will still be very popular overall. So Drytron is not in a great spot, and the same is for Eldritch. Eldritch I'm even going to throw down here. I've talked about it in the past. I'm probably even going to exclude Eldritch in future tier lists unless it sees a lot of play for some reason. But Eldritch just does not keep up with other trap decks in the game. Of course, it still is a Floodgate deck, and it still could steal a couple games from people by flipping Floodgates, but overall, Eldritch is a worse trap deck than Labyrinth, and it's a worse stun/Floodgate deck than Runic, so I really wouldn't recommend you to play Eldritch. And the same goes for Exo Sister, actually. Like, Exo Sister is not an awful deck. I'm not gonna say it's like so mega lol bad, right? But if you compare the deck to the decks up here, like, it just doesn't compare. And especially now that like Shifter is going to play less of a role, I think, in this upcoming format, right? Like, Shifter is still a good card. It's still oppressive, but depending on what ends up on top, right? Like, we're going to see Shifter not even being a solid main deck option anymore. And that was, like, the only thing that Exo Sister did Fluanderese is like Exo Sister, but better, as it's always been, even without Barrier Statue. I wouldn't say Flunder is dead, but I also wouldn't say Flunder is good. It's kind of like in the same spot as it is in Master Duel right now, which is a great point for like comparison. But for Master Duel, there's two things. The power level in Master Duel is a little bit lower because we haven't had the Power of the Elements cards yet. And also, in Master Duel, it's not even like consistently doing well. It's like an okay deck, which I assume is still going to be the case. The deck still has great grind game. The deck still can play Shifter, whatever that's worth in the upcoming format. Probably not worth as much as it is right now. And it still makes relatively good boards, but like they're just not unbreakable anymore, right? The Barrier Statue made it truly unbreakable most of the time. Now it's just like, okay, Empen means you have to summon in defense. I have the trap to summon like an Apex or a Reza, which is like a bounce, and then I have it, or a negate, and then I can book your stuff. But I think that's very realistic to play through. I think the deck is not dead. I really don't think so, but I think it's not something that people are immediately going to be hyped to try, so I don't expect to see it a whole lot. I don't think it's that great. Adignister is, once again, a lot of the decks from this last year's national format are going to end up in this category. People are going to be hyped to try them out again, but I just don't see this keeping up in terms of power level with the other decks. I do think this deck is even a little bit better than Mathmech, because this at least doesn't completely get screwed over by Bystials. Just a little bit, I guess. Like, it can suffer from Bystials a little bit if you get hit by them in some parts of your combo, because some of them are light or dark, but actually all three of these Cybers decks, Mathmech, Marincess, and Adignister, are all not bad. Don't mistake this category with bad decks. All of those decks are like okay, but none of those decks are going to be meta-defining, super strong, or like the best choice for events, I think, if you want to do as well as possible, simply because they are kind of like not as good as the stuff that we have. It's just like one card combo with a bunch of hand trap, basically, which all of those lists are. I don't think that's going to be particularly well positioned in the metagame, and that's that for all the Cybers decks. Like, they're all okay, but probably not the best choice if you want to do super well at a YCS. You can definitely top like a regional with those decks. Don't mistake that category for like definitely don't play those decks. If I thought those decks were completely bad, I would put them down here, where I think these two decks are. Like, there still is a difference between the decks down here and the decks up here. And now we have a couple of the heavyweights coming up. I have a take on Kashtira that is, I feel like, different than what most people think, because people have like complained about this new ban list in some ways, where they said like, oh, now everyone has to spend their money on Kashtira. And I don't think that's true. Regardless, I'm still going to put Kashtira into this category right here, because yes, it is a very strong deck. And also, yes, I do not like the way Kashtira plays. I do not enjoy the mechanics that Kashtira has. I think like taking apart your extra deck, banishing top cards of your deck face down, locking your zones. I don't think Kashtira is very fun, but only because you don't like to play against a deck, or because you don't think a deck is fun, doesn't mean that it's the best deck in the format, right? That like, yeah, okay, I don't like being paired against Kashtira, but that doesn't mean that I'm actually like scared of it, or like think I'm always going to lose to it. I don't think that's the case. I think the Kashtira cards are very strong cards that will probably find a home in various decks, right? Kashtira as a splash can be very strong with like just Fenrir, Field Spell, smaller packages basically. But overall, I think Kashtira in the upcoming format is going to play a very similar role to what Fluanderese was in the past. Fluanderese in the past was obnoxious, you hated to face it, but at the end of the day, it never turned out to be the actual best deck for the format, right? And I think that's very similar to Kashtira, because Kashtira, and I've said this before, I haven't made a specific video on YouTube about it, which is why I'm repeating myself, but Kashtira does not really check the boxes of a deck that is completely dominant in the metagame. The deck doesn't put up any negates. The deck doesn't really diversify its end board in a way where it has like back row and maybe interruption from grave or hand. It puts up like a Shangri era that locks like 3 of your zones, not even all of them, unless they draw completely nuts. Like, in order for you to lock more than 3 of your opponent's zones, you have to draw very specific, like 3-4 card combos and upwards and go uninterrupted, which is completely unreasonable. Normally, the deck puts up like a Macrocosmos, a Shangri era that locks 3 zones and summons a Fenrir and banishes a card from your extra deck and a couple random cards from your deck. That is all. That is all it does. It does so very consistently. It's very hard to combat it with hand traps, But because the board that it makes is so weak to spells anyways, I predict that we're going to see a couple of decks just go without hand traps in the next format and just beat up the deck with like Tasking, Talents, Change of Heart, Mind Control, whatever, you name it. All those cards are incredibly strong against Kashtira. Nibiru is very strong against Kashtira if they don't play around it. Kurikara is really strong. There is so many cards that hit Kashtira's endboard really hard. The endboard is just not resilient enough for it to be the best deck in the format. And so I don't think Kashtira will actually end up being a deck that you need to play if you want to do well. You will not be forced to pay the price for Kashtira, and it will not end up being tier 0 or even like the best deck out of the tier 1 decks. I don't see that happening. Yes, the deck will see play. Yes, you're sometimes gonna auto lose games to it because you don't draw an answer and it's annoying. Basically all the things that Flunder did last format. Kashtira is new Flunder. That's it. If you want to be that guy and you can't be that anymore with Flunder, yes, Kashtira is that deck now. But anyone just trying to do as well as possible and don't want to spend all the money on Kashtira, you don't have to. You really don't have to. And even then, I think it's less oppressive than Flunder because of no barrier statue-esque situation, right? It's just like very easy to solve with certain board breakers, in my opinion. So yes, Kashtira is strong. Yes, it goes into the huge potential category, but mainly because I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation with the Kashtira cards in other archetypes. Because they are just generically very strong. But I personally am not worried as much about pure Kashtira as a deck as some people out there, which take it with a grain of salt. Of course, this is my first impression, but I don't think Kashtira is as good as people make it out to be. Yes, it is definitely as annoying as people make it out to be, but I don't think it's as good as people make it out to be. Anyways, Labyrinth goes here. You might not like it, but that deck is good. And I'm not even talking about the floodgates. If you've looked into the Labyrinth cards, you guys know I'm a trap deck enjoyer, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't enjoy the floodgate playstyle, but like the grind game playstyle of like normal trap cards, I enjoy. And I think Labyrinth has an insane grind game, and yes, it can also be paired with floodgates. I don't know if that's going to be the best version, but I mean, if floodgates are at your disposal, you probably use them. But overall, the Labyrinth grind game is actually insane. I think someone that truly understands the Labyrinth grind game might not even need floodgates to win with this. And I think some of the trap cards that it can play are also very good against Kashtira because Labyrinth doesn't need its extra deck. You can also build your Labyrinth deck in a way where the random banishes from the top of your deck don't matter as often. And so you probably can just go like, oh, Kashtira locks a couple of my monster zones anyway, set 5 pass, break your board with like a compulse way measuring or way bridge, whatever it's called. Whatever, there's ways. I think Labyrinth is a good deck. I'm excited to try it. I think it looks very fun besides the floodgates. One thing to be mentioned in this spot is that Labyrinth is one of those decks that obviously has the ability to take advantage of people not being prepared for it. I don't think they'll block your main monster zone after seeing extra. Okay, look, if you are a competent Labyrinth player, you are not going to play a Labyrinth extra deck. I'm throwing that at you right now. You will simply not play your freaking one fiend monster that you will summon every 10 games maybe, that you don't actually need because you only ever touch your extra deck if you already win the game. You freaking play an extra deck of a different deck. You play like the branded extra deck. You play a Kashtira extra deck, whatever you think is fitting. You don't play a Labyrinth extra deck. There's no shot. You will not. That will not be the play with Kashtira in the metagame. You don't need your extra deck. So you are not going to give away the information that you're playing Labyrinth against Kashtira. You're not going to play Punishment. Unironically, 0 extra deck cards could be worth. I mean, you don't get to play the pots then. I don't know if that's worth it. That's a topic for a different day. I don't think that Kashtira locking your spell trap zones all the time is a problem because A, this deck can play cards like Lava Golem and Sphere Mode in the side deck, no problem. After they know what you're playing, right? You have ways. They're never going to lock all of your back row. They're going to lock like 3. So you can either still set 2, which sometimes can be enough to remove the Shangri era, or you can simply activate a power spell after siding. Like, that's not a problem. I think Labyrinth has potential. I hope it's not going to be a floodgate pile. It might be, but I'm looking forward to playing the more grindy, interaction-based versions of the deck. Medolce goes down here now because of a couple of things. First of all, it loses the Ishizu cards, which it was playing to some extent. But it also loses one of the main reasons to play the deck, which was it kind of countered Tearlament. It was kind of okay against Tearlament, so I don't think Medolce is something I would recommend for the upcoming format. Plain and simple. Mikanko, I've decided to keep it in here. I think Mikanko Libromancer is something... Like, this deck just feels like a freaking Nationals deck from last year, if you know what I mean. Like, this deck just feels like a deck that could have existed exactly like this, like a year ago, and would have been a decent Nationals deck. I don't know if it's good enough because it's just another combo pile. Pure Mikanko as well is probably not good yet, but the engine... Like, not pure Mikanko as a deck, but the engine overall, I see it as kind of like an adventure engine type of situation where I could see these cards seeing play somewhere. I just don't know where yet. What I like about the Mikanko engine is that I feel like you can play it in so many different ways. Like, you can play very small Mikanko packages, like what people have been doing in Tearlament in this last couple of weeks. You play only Ohime, the quick play spell, and like one of the equip spells to make it just a level 6 extender that can discard your tier names for effect, and also like make Beatrice with, and like sometimes steal your opponent's monsters or whatever. Very small package, but can be very efficient. But you can also go like bigger with like the Isolde combos and whatnot, which they've been doing in the Mikanko Libromancer. But I think I just can't help but feel like the Mikanko engine has some potential. I don't know exactly where it's gonna go yet, but I think it is something worth checking out depending on what deck you're playing. Naturia, I think, is still a good deck. I think Naturia, specifically Naturia Runic, I could see that deck being good. Maybe even up here. Like, that deck feels like a good deck because with any Runic deck, you have like a very good time now because the Ishizu shufflers are gone. Of course, a Rise Heart is annoying for Runic because it banishes your stuff, but you have like plenty of outs against a Rise Heart, right? You have like Flashing Fire, you have Freezing Curses. That alone is 6 outs to immediately stop that. I do think Runic in general has some potential, and Naturia Runic is one of the better versions from the past, so I do think that deck is definitely going to see experimentation and probably ends up being a playable deck in this upcoming format. I do think so. We're going to have to see whether it ends up being a top tier deck or not that much, but I think it's playable. Plants, Rika, Sun Avalon, whatever pile, may be good. I honestly don't know enough about the deck to say whether it has actual potential or not, but I do think it's probably towards the top of the maybe good category. Like, I think some people that really enjoyed the deck in the past are going to experiment with it, and they are right to do so because I think that it's definitely not bad. Maybe with Adventure, possibly. I mean, it won the European Championship in a format after Power of the Elements, and Tearlament is now probably weaker than it was back then, and the same goes for Sprite. So maybe it's all right. Plunder is a deck that I've included despite not knowing enough about it. I'm gonna say this deck is maybe good. It makes great use of the Adventure engine. It gets great support in the new ship. I personally don't know enough to tell you whether it's gonna be a great deck, just an okay deck, or a bad deck. I'm gonna admit it, but my first impression of the deck is that it is worth trying out. You're probably not gonna end up with the best deck in the game, but I think if you dedicate some time to it and you find a good version and you get good at playing it, I think you can definitely top regionals and maybe even like higher level events with a Plunder Patrol list. I could definitely see that happening. Punk Therion goes here. That deck is solid. I think the Punk engine has gotten reasonable support with the new level 8 Synchro that can send like Lily Borea. I think it's all right. Sargass is also really cool in Photon Hypernova. Yes, if you find ways to make Sargass with like 2 level 4s. I think Therion is something that is like, once Dimension Force was released, the cards were immediately good. Everyone knew they had potential, but then Power of the Elements came around the corner and was like, yeah, I'm just better than that now. But now that some of the archetypes from Power of the Elements have received hits, this is one of the decks that I think has just straight up more potential than these Cybers deck down here, because that deck is like, it's the definition of I can play a bunch of hand traps and I have a bunch of 1 to 2 card combos that are decently strong. But I think in this case, the combos are stronger than these combos down here, and the deck probably will not care about Bystials as well. So I think anything that's like Punk Therion, Pure Punk situation, maybe even like that type of stuff, I could see being a good hand trap deck in the upcoming format. Purely needs more support. We know it's getting more support soon. Until then, I don't think Purely is going to see a lot of play. However, with the new support, it's going to be quite nice, I think. But until then, I'm going to leave it here. Rescue Ace, save yourself some trouble. I don't think your time is well spent if you lab some Rescue Ace right now. Look, Mikanko and Purely, yes, go ahead. Try it. Maybe it works. Rescue Ace out of Amazing Defenders is the one that's like, we forget about it, okay? We forget about it. Probably going to be the last time I include it in a tier list unless it shows some unexpected results. For now, I think save yourself the pain with Rescue Ace. It's just not that good. Runic has huge potential. The Runic engine is very strong. I would know that the Runic engine is a very strong engine with a lot of potential, and it was held back only by the fact, and literally only by the fact, that the Ishizu shufflers completely destroyed the deck, because you would just never freaking be able to draw with Fountain. The only thing that really was the reason why you would want to play Runic was Fountain draws. The Ishizu engine just completely messing with that basically killed the entire archetype for an entire format. Now, Runics are back. Runic Sprite, Runic Naturia, whatever else you can think of, like, probably can pair with Runic. Even the pure Runic stun deck is probably good. I hate to break it to you, but that deck is probably strong as well. I hate it. I hate the Runic stun deck. I much prefer Runic combo versions, but that deck is good. And the Runic engine has, I think, a high chance of being part of the best deck for a YCS. I can't tell you what it is yet. Maybe it's Runic Sprite, maybe it's Runic Naturia, maybe it's Runic whatever, but Runic goes together with so many decks. There's almost no deck in the game that doesn't appreciate sometimes drawing 3 cards, having the utility from the Runic spells, having level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5 extenders. There's no way there won't be a deck that uses the Runic cards. There is just no way. Those cards are good, those cards will see play, and those cards have huge potential. Let's just not talk about it. It's just gonna make me sad. Okay, let's just not talk about Salamangreat right now, please. Can we not? All right, please, thank you. Okay, I have prepared a bunch of Sprite versions here because, and I want to put this as a huge disclaimer, Sprite is not dead. Who said Sprite was dead? Like, what the hell? Only because Elf was freaking broken? Elf was really good, but Sprite is not dead. Like, what the hell? How is Sprite still not way better than all of these decks from, like, the early 2022? Like, freaking one blue or one jet is still, like, printing cards out the wazoo, creating so much advantage, creating different forms of interruption in the form of, like, double cross or smashers. Sprite is still really good. I don't know exactly what the best version is going to be, which is why I included some, but Sprite still has huge potential as on its own, right? I don't know if pure Sprite is going to be the best. You're probably going to want to pair it up with something. And what that something is depends. I think Gishki Sprite is the deck out of all the Sprite versions that is hit the most by the Elf hit, which is kind of a weird thing to say because the deck hasn't even existed yet. But I think that is the deck that cared about Elf the most, because that deck was abusing Elf to recycle Gishki Abyss to summon multiple times and use its search effect, which wasn't once per turn. So, like, that's a huge synergy point just being taken away. That being said, that deck can also replace Elf in some ways. Like, you have Coral Anemone, right? It locks you into water, but there is ways to recycle Gishki Abyss. So that deck is like something that you might want to toy around with. I don't know if it's going to be the best Sprite version, but be aware that it takes a huge hit from the Elf ban. Runic Sprite is the first thing I'm gonna try. And I know Twitch chat is already freaking freaking out about, like, please give me a new Runic Sprite version. We're gonna do that after we are done filming the tier list. Runic Sprite, I think, is still very strong for multiple reasons. First of all, of course, the Ishizu shufflers are gone. I've talked about it when I talked about Runic. Runic Sprite was the deck that used Elf to just the minimal extent. Like, of course, I make Elf in every single end board in Runic Sprite, but what I did with it was, like, revive Hyperia to draw a card. It was very good in the grind game, but it's not like I can't make a different Link 2 to end on. Like, we can still end on Sprint, which, don't forget that freaking Sprint is still a good interruption. Of course, people have been, like, overlaying Sprint all the time, but it's still a bounce. We can still make IP. We can make Pit Knight early. We can make Mannequin Cat. We can make Gin Buster. We can leave Red and Carrot on the board. We have Smashers. Like, we have so many forms of interruption besides Elf in any version of Sprite. I think there's no way that Sprite is not good as a pure or runic form. We can still make Toad with Bujinki Ahashima. However, I want to say one thing about Bujinki Ahashima. I don't think that's going to be the best version. I don't think investing all that into a Toad is that great anymore, because without Elf, Toad is not as good, which makes me believe that unfortunately we're not going to be summoning Toad in the best version of Sprite. But yes, you are right. With Bujinki Ahashima, there is a line that can still make Toad relatively easily if you want to. Now, the question on whether you want or not is a different question. Another version that I want to emphasize is Life Twin Sprite. Life Twin Sprite is great, I think. I think it is one of the decks that, yes, it made Elf, but it also didn't really care about Elf as much. It has its own end board. It has its own way to get into a grind game without Elf. Like, the Life Twin cards are great at creating a nice little grind game situation. Elf reviving the Link 2 was really good, but I still think that this deck has potential. I'm gonna put it lower than Runic Sprite, but I think Life Twin Sprite is absolutely fine. Tri-Brigade Sprite is also probably okay. Yeah, it's probably fine, actually. I don't see it being worse than, like, these. The more I think about it, all these versions are fine. I don't know why everyone is doomsaying on Sprite. I'm gonna experiment with Sprite, and I'm sure it's gonna be great. I think it's good. I can't be convinced otherwise at this point in time. Like, I'm gonna try and see. It might end up being worse than some of the other decks here, but I still, at this point in time, I see huge potential. This is not Copium. There's no way it's Copium. Sprite Blue still prints like 3 cards. It just stands in front of the printer and prints 3 cards for you, and like actual good cards, like negates and smashers removal and whatnot. Like, it's just like good cards. And Tri-Brigade Sprite honestly is also one of those decks that didn't even care about Elf, I feel like. I mean, sometimes yes, but like you can still make like IP, Revolt, Pit Knight, whatever. Like, it's still really strong, and it still has Zeus for going second. Nah, there's no shot Sprite isn't good. I included Springans because I felt like last time I just ignored it because it felt like compared to the other stuff, it's like not as good. But the other stuff is a lot weaker now. I've looked at some Springans combos and I feel like they're not that bad. I don't know. I feel like Springans is okay. I don't know if it's gonna end up being like great, but I think it's all right. Sword Soul. Sword Soul is like the one deck from last year's Nationals that hasn't really changed, but is still kind of okay. It's highly adaptable in the sense that it can play a lot of like non-engine, it can play a lot of tech cards, it has an okay end board, it's a nice mid-range deck. I still don't think it will compare to these decks up here. Like, I'm looking at these decks up here, and I think, yeah, all of those decks are better than Sword Soul with the new set. But Sword Soul is just not bad. I don't think it's gonna go into the huge potential category, but it's okay, I think. Tearlaments. I've included Tearlaments. Believe it or not, I want to lose a few words about Tearlaments for this upcoming format. I think Tearlament as a pure form, while it's not completely dead, I don't think, I would think a deck that is focused on making a pure Tearlament approach work probably goes into like here. You can try and make it work. You can still find ways to combo, but it's probably not good. Now, one thing that I do think about Tearlaments is that they are very certainly used as an engine in the upcoming format. The reason why I say this is because for pure Tearlaments, they've done a couple things to this deck that are just like absolutely crucial to why the deck was good. They've hit it at 3 different angles. They've like kicked out the kneecap and also gave him like a slap on the head, and then also like kicked in their like ankle. I don't know, like 3 different spots. They hit it really hard because they've stopped your consistent access to the Ishizu engine, which means that you are no longer consistently accessing your mill 5s and your shufflers. So that is a huge consistency hit. So the way that the deck plays has been neutered a lot, like the way it starts playing. And the second thing they did is they've also made your mills a lot worse. Even if you get to mill 5 or even if you get to mill 3 off of a Sharon, because they've hit so many good mills, like you lose 2 Merly, 2 Sharon, 2 Havnis, 2 Mudora, 2 Keldo, 2 Kelbeck, 2 Agido. Your mills are just not as good. Even if you get to the mill 5, what are you gonna mill? Like, the chances you're actually gonna mill broken are not that good. And then the third hit, the nail in the coffin, is like, even if you pull off a combo, even if you mill something cool, even if you mill your 1 Havnis or your 1 Sharon or your 1 Merly, you're not making a Kit Kalos anymore. You're making something that's a lot worse. Now, of course, Rule Kalos is still a fine card if you have King of the Swamp. Of course, Garura is powerful, but they're not Kit Kalos level. So I think Tearlament as a pure form, while it probably can play, will simply not be a good choice. Yes, you can try to make it work, but why would you? Whatever comes out at the end of it is probably not worth all the effort. I think that the Ishizus as an engine in other decks are playable. My prediction is we're not going to see a good pure Tearlament deck, but we can see something like branded playing the tier limit names. If you use polymerization and you fuse away a tier limit, that's just a free body, a free second fusion that you get. If you go for like branded fusion, send Albaz plus Smurly or whatever, you get 2 fusions out of it, right? Whether that's the best version to play branded, I don't know, but you can, right? You can play like mixtures of decks that play some amount of tier limits. My prediction, just so we can move on from tier, is that pure tier, for the reasons I've previously mentioned, not worth playing. Experimenting with tier limit as an engine in other decks, I can see it. Tri-Brigade, Lyrilusk, and Virtual World. I mean, it's alright, I guess. I don't know. They're not awful. I do not think they're awful. I don't think they're great. Kind of like the same vein as these other decks. So as you can see, what I wanted to showcase that I felt like are important to make. The 3 main points I wanted to make clear is that, first of all, I don't think we are going back to last year's national format. I think that these decks up here in the first and second row, which most of them have not been around last year's national, are all better than all of last year's national decks. You notice I've ranked all of these lower except for branded because that's gotten new support. All of those decks from last year's nationals I don't think are as good as the new stuff we have. I simply don't think that's the case. I think between branded, Kashtira, Labyrinth, and some Sprite version, that's going to be like the first 4 things to experiment, the first decks to beat, alongside maybe some of these down here. That's the one thing I really wanted to make clear, is that like we will not go back into last year's national because those decks still don't keep up. That being said, some decks from the past formats are better than others, which is why you notice that some of them I put here were like I give them some potential and some of them are down here. And then last but not least, people are heavily overestimating Kashtira, even though it has a lot of potential. People are heavily underestimating Sprite at this point in time, and I think it's going to be a good format. I actually do think it's going to be a good format. All of those decks up here, except for Kashtira, I think will be enjoyable. I mean, except for Runic Stun. Please don't play Runic Stun, please. I think it looks like a cool format. I think it's going to end up being like 4 to 5 really strong decks. Maybe like 2 or 3 will come out on top, but I'm looking forward to it. Let me know what you thought of the explanations. Let me know what you think of the upcoming format. Let me think if you enjoyed the ban list. Of course, my first reaction to the ban list is also on YouTube. I'm gonna go back, head on to stream, try some of these decks. If you want to see me try some of these decks, of course, the link to the VOD channel is in the description below, where if you ever miss a stream or you don't get to you normally watch the streams at your local time, the VODs are now up on YouTube. There's a separate channel for it, so you might want to check it out in the description down below. Without further ado, hope you enjoyed. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and bye-bye YouTube. Say goodbye to YouTube chat. Peace.